One of the scariest parts about buying an investment property is working with a building and pest inspector and reviewing their building and pest report after having a look through the property, because they're going to shed some light on some issues with the property that you weren't aware of up until that point in time. Now, every single person goes through this process. So in today's video, I've got my colleague Hayden in here today to educate you on how to deal with the building and pest inspectors and how to get the best possible result and how to alleviate some of the painful stresses that we all go through after reviewing a building and pest report. Now, I remember the first investment property that I purchased was this tiny little beach shack in North Brisbane that was built in the 50s, had an asbestos roof, the paint was flaking, the gutters were completely rusted through, there was holes through the asbestos walls internally, there was cracks in the stumps underneath the property, there was cracks in the driveway. It was an absolute piece of shit. Then I got the building and pest report, and after seeing some clients' reports that are like, 20 to 30 pages long, I get mine that's like 100 pages long, and I've gone, no, Ben, I've already paid my deposit. I've already paid the building and pest inspector. The property's fucked. I can't buy it. What's going on? And I was freaking out, but thank God I had Ben at that point in time to alleviate some of those stresses and help me understand the actual purpose of the building and pest report, and then reconfirm my strategy as well, because he's like, hey, Simon, you bought a property that you're going to knock down in the future. Of course it's going to be crap. Of course the building and pest is going to be bad. But this is a really common theme with every single one of our clients, especially if it is their first investment property. They're not used to seeing that. They're not used to buying properties that are dated and have a few issues wrong with them. So thanks heaps for coming in today, because you have probably read over how many building and pest reports over how many years?
Yeah, probably 400 or 500 over the last 2.5 years.
Wow, yeah, so certainly know a little bit about it. Now, I just want to throw a big disclaimer out there, guys. We are not building and pest inspectors, but we are property investors that have a lot of experience with this stuff. We are buyer's agents that do help our clients purchase investment properties every single month. We do introduce those clients to an awesome building and pest inspector in Brisbane that supports them through the process. But obviously you're there to deal with the emotional factors that people do go through. So tell us a little bit more about the building and pest process.
Yeah, sure. So usually the building and pest will happen maybe around 3 to 7 days, sometime late in the first week after you've got the contract. The way you reacted there is, even if you buy a 10-year-old low maintenance home, it's still a similar reaction. So it's super overwhelming. You basically go from looking at the pretty photos to looking at these zoomed up. Could be up to 100-page report of every little tiny thing that's wrong with the property. The first thing I would recommend was maybe not spend 5 hours as soon as you get it back reading through every word of the report. There's a whole heap of disclaimers in there. You can sort of build yourself up and work yourself up a bit if you do spend that much time on it. Instead, what I would recommend would be look through it, like have a glance through it, 10, 20, 30 minutes, looking at the photos, having a bit of a read, but then jump straight on the phone and call the inspector directly. You've paid them good money. That builder's in the industry for years and years. Like, there's lots of stuff they have to put in the report, whereas talking to them on the phone, they give you a much more realistic sort of feedback on what it's like. You can ask them anything I should be worried about here. What would you be worried about if you bought the home? What do you think needs to be done immediately? How much might this cost? And just chat to them. Like, they're normal people. They're not scary. Most of them just laid back blokes who will happily just share, and more often than not they do ease clients' concerns, like, because they give a more realistic sense and without all these extra pages and disclaimers. So that's number one. Getting it back, my advice is always, we basically just want to gather all the information, right? And that's just making different calls, maybe doing further checks, but it's more just, instead of freaking out, let's just take a breath and gather all the information over the next few days that we can, and then make a call from there.
And what I think is important to recognise is that, for us as property investors, the value is in the location that we're buying and, trying to get a nice big piece of land in a quality suburb, in a quality street. And then the house is obviously, something that we're buying that we're going to rent out but you can always change a house, and there's always going to be issues with a property that was built 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. So it's just having that perspective and having that awareness that there is naturally going to be some issues. Don't catastrophize that situation or reality. Talk to your advisors, talk to your team to get the realistic information, and talk to the experts, because you reading your first ever building and pest report, of course it's going to seem a little bit scary and overwhelming, but when you talk to an experienced building and pest inspector that's done thousands of these reports, probably bought a fair few properties themselves as well. Well, we like to work with building and or any advisor that's a property investor themselves as well, because they know the value there. But yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Like, just lean on your advisors here and don't try and make those assumptions yourself, because you don't have the experience to be able to make those accurate assumptions.
Exactly right. And another person you can lean on as well is your property manager. So they're obviously not builders, but they rent out hundreds of homes. I always recommend sending them the report and having a chat to them as well, and being like, from a tenancy perspective, like, is there anything that you think is in the report from like a safety issue, or anything that you think could be done to maximise rent? Have a chat to them, get their thoughts as well. So speaking to the inspector and the property manager is always the first two things I would recommend. From there, after you speak to those two, sometimes there might be some things that come up that require some further checks. You might need to organise say if there's some moisture readings, you might want to organise a leak detection test. If there's...
Is that common?
It's somewhat common, to be honest, yeah. Like a lot of older bathrooms, especially, like if the grout's a bit average, or the taps aren't like sealed properly, a little bit can get behind and give those readings. So a lot of the time it does end up being minor more often than not, but it's always worth checking out.
Sure.
You want to know what's hidden in the walls. Similar to termites, right? Like if there's any sort of termite evidence outside, or any mudding or anything, it's always worth getting an invasive inspection just to look inside the walls. Might get like a roofer to come in if there's issues with the roof, or structural engineer if there's some crack. Like, there's a lot of extra people that you can get for further checks, but you wouldn't worry about that until you speak to the building and pest guy and the property manager. And if they're sort of flagging a few issues that could be worse, then that's when you would go ahead and organise those extra checks if needed.
I think a cool thing to mention here as well is, like, when I got that building and pest report, I shit the bed and I was really scared. But then after talking to the building and pest inspector, after talking to my brother, and after talking to my property manager, they all actually told me the reality of this property. And then all I had to do was spend $8,000 on the property to get it rentable.
Yep.
So I thought I was going to have to knock it down immediately to get tenants in there, but no, from a legal perspective, and I'm not getting market value rent for that property because it's not nice, but I'm still able to rent it out after spending a little bit of money and doing some of those maintenance requests that were a legal requirement to get tenants into the property. So your property manager will know the legal requirements, your building and pest inspector will know like the actual structural integrity of the building, right?
Yep, exactly right. So we've got all that information from those people, and now there's a couple of options. So if for whatever reason, and this does happen, like 1 in 10, 1 in 15 properties, there might be some significant issues that would make you want to walk away from the property, and that's what the inspection's for, right? To identify
Absolutely.
those. It does happen. So if that's the case, then we would work with the solicitor to safely walk away from the property under the building and pest condition. Obviously, you hope it doesn't happen, but...
And it's important to recognise at that stage, you've already purchased the property. So you've got it under contract at a certain price, and that's based on current market value and what you expect that property to be worth in the current market. Then when you get the building and pest, if it sheds some light on issues that you weren't aware of, then that property may no longer align with your strategy or your goals.
Yeah.
And rather than trying to, salvage that property, it will probably cost you more money than just to terminate and go, yeah, I've spent $500 on the building and pest, but this property no longer serves my needs, so I'm going to go out there and look for a more suitable property. So what was the numbers there? Like 1 in 10 to 15 properties.
Yeah.
So, around, 5 to 10% of the time you may have to walk away, which is relatively high.
Yeah, it's more common than you think. A lot of people can get attached to it and will hold on to a property that they maybe shouldn't. But like you said, you pay few fees to safely walk away from the property. You take the long-term view. You go in and find the right property a few weeks later.
Yep.
It's definitely going to be worth it. So if it needs to be done, then that's what that's for, and you should do it.
Absolutely.
If for whatever reason, obviously you're hoping it doesn't need to be done, from there, there will always be issues in the report. No matter how good it looks, there's always going to be something. So from there, it's nice to work with your solicitor to see if you could maybe get the sellers to fix some of those items, or maybe offer a small price reduction. So we're trying to do that based off of, so if there's significant items that we walk away from the property, we're obviously not going to try to negotiate it. If there's on the other end basically nothing in the report that's like your home's just beautiful and it looks good.
Yeah, beautiful, renovated, brand new property.
If you're somewhere in the middle where there's some issues that were identified that maybe you weren't aware of, not talking about things like a little stain on the carpet or a mark on a wall, which you would maybe be expected to see when you inspected the property, but more things that have come up that you mightn't have been aware of. Like a couple of examples could be, say, a leaning fence or leaking gutters, some cracked roof tiles, some of those things that do come up that you're unaware of. From there, like it's you can give it a shot at taking those items and just seeing if we can negotiate with the sellers in one way or another. One way to do this is, the way we like to do it is really request the items, and because we don't just want to go, there's some issues, give me like a big reduction. It doesn't really give context. It's sort of a bit rude. Like it's not really the nicest thing to do. Whereas we're trying to be realistic and take realistic items and go, we're unaware of these. Can you please rectify these? And if not, like if the sellers are interstate or something, if you're unable to rectify the items, would you be open to a small monetary compensation for those items instead? These results are never guaranteed. It's obviously, you just ask. Sometimes you have a really clean report, and you might get some items fixed or a reduction, and other times you have a property that has heaps of issues and the sellers are just straight up take it or leave it. Like, it is what it is. So
what's important to recognise here, guys, is the fact that it will really depend on the market conditions as to whether or not you'll be able to negotiate on that building and pest, because if you've got a few minor issues there that, ideally you'd want the sellers to rectify or get a little bit of a discount, if it's a buyer's market and there's not much competition and the agent doesn't have any backup offers, then you've got more weight during those negotiations. You've got more power in those negotiations. But in a hot market where you're competing with other buyers and properties are seeing multiple offers, then they're just going to tell you, catch you later, we'll take this other offer if you're going to play hardball with them. So you really need to understand the current market conditions to understand how much you can actually negotiate. But I think the most important thing to realize is it really depends on the market conditions, and it really depends on the property type that you're going to be buying. If it's a nice home, there's not going to be any scope to negotiate. If it's a completely shit box and it's a hot market, it's going to be really hard to negotiate anything as well, because you're going to know that from the photos and the videos and the inspection and stuff like that as well.
Yeah, exactly right. It's definitely driven by, that's the main factor, is market condition. There's also like the seller's scenario as well. A lot of factors at play. On average across the board, like it's common to, you're common to get something, right? Like I'm not going to say every time, but it's probably a third of the time it's a flat out no. A third of the time you might get maybe a few of your items that you requested, and a third of the time you might get a small reduction. So that comes in, those percentages change depending on the market, as you said, but that's sort of roughly where it looks. So it's always worth a shot. You just
absolutely. Never know. Yeah, absolutely. And it's a bit of fun as well, sweetens the deal a little bit if you can get that. But I wouldn't get too caught up with the building and pest either. As we said, the value's in the strategy, the value's in the market, the pocket of the market, the suburb, the pocket of the suburb, the street, the land size, all of those things are far more important and are going to make you far more money in capital growth long term than a couple of little maintenance items in that building and pest report. So have perspective throughout that process. Be aware of what really matters and what doesn't really matter, and lean on your team of advisors, right?
Exactly right. That's a great point you're making there, because you go up and down tens of thousands of dollars when you're buying the property, and then it's all of a sudden you get the building and pests and you're a bit overwhelmed, and you can naturally find yourself getting caught up over like $1,000 or $2,000, and it's like, take a step back, look at the big picture, and it gives you a bit more like perspective.
Look, I really appreciate you coming on to the channel today, Hato, and just educating people on this stressful part of the process, because it is quite stressful. So it can be really important to have somebody like you in their corner that's got a lot of experience, that's read a lot of these reports, that has been through that personally as well. So I really appreciate it, mate. Now, for anybody out there that is, you know, in the process of buying a property and buying one up here in Queensland via private treaty, you're generally going to get a building and pest report. So share this video with them, give us a like, give us a subscribe. I think this is some important information that not many people are talking about publicly at the moment. So it just helps you become a better investor and helps you generate a better return on your investment. So thanks so much for coming.
Thanks, mate.
Woo! That's a wrap.
That's a wrap.
Getting
Have a
cool,
spin.
bro. Yeah. Oh, sweaty. So sweaty. Oh, that's good. Look at that.
So nice, eh?
Oh.